There is a cruelty worse than being unwanted. To be unwanted, a person must first be seen, and the world had never once troubled to truly look at Wren Alderton. She was the plain daughter, the quiet one, the girl kept to the edges of rooms and the bottom of ledgers. So when her brother gambled their name into ruin and settled the debt with her hand, and the coldest duke in England agreed to take the plainest lady in 3 counties, all of society leaned in to watch her weep. Instead, on her wedding night, before the duke could speak a single word, Wren spoke first, and set one quiet condition between them that neither of them would ever be able to take back. The rain had got into Alderton Grange years ago and never quite left. It lived in the north corridor now, brown blooms across the ceiling plaster, the sweet rot of the window frames, the great hall smelling always of wet stone and cold ash. Wren Alderton had learned to read the house the way other women read faces, and she knew, to the last shilling, exactly how little was left. Quote, "Haldest," and she was at the accounts that morning in the small breakfast room, where a fire was permitted only because the coal there was cheapest. She was 25, though the ledgers had aged her the way the damp had aged the house. Her gown was 3 winters old, a grey, so drab the village dressmakers had a name for it, servant's grey, and her dark hair was pinned back without ornament or mercy. She was not ugly, that was the trouble. Ugliness, at least, is remembered. Wren was merely unremarkable, a face the eye slid past on its way to something brighter, and the eye, in this house, always found her sister. Elowen was 17 and lovely the way. A spring morning is lovely, all gold and ease, and quite without malice, which somehow made it worse. She was still abed at this hour. She was always abed at this hour. It was Wren who rose in the dark, Wren who added the columns, Wren who caught the errors the tradesmen buried in their sums, expecting no one at the Grange to be clever enough to catch them. Numbers are the only honest things left in England, her father had told her once, guiding her small hand along a row of figures. Everything else is a costume, my Wren. Learn to read the sum beneath the smile. Sir Rowland Alderton had been dead 4 years. He had been the only person who ever looked at her and seemed to see something worth the looking. Since the fever took him, Wren had kept the accounts, the tenants' grievances, and her own counsel, and watched the family fold quietly inward. The catching of lies was her one gift, and it was a useless one. A lady was not meant to see clearly. A lady was meant to be seen, admired at the assembly, blushing at the right moment, married off. Wren had been out 5 seasons. She had heard herself called once within earshot, the plain Alderton, the sister, they keep to mind the coats. She had not wept. She had gone home and balanced the wine merchant's account and found him cheating them of £9, and had felt, for one clean moment, worth more than the Viscount would ever be. It was Crispin who had ruined them. Her brother had come into the baronetcy at 19 with a handsome face, a weak chin, and an unshakable faith in his own luck, and had spent 2 years perfecting that faith in the card-rooms of London, while the Grange rotted around the women he had left behind. He wrote rarely, and when he did, the letters asked for money in the language of a man conferring a favor. This morning there had been no letter. There had been, instead, at first light, the sound Wren had dreaded for a year without naming it, the rattle of wheels on the drive, the particular heaviness of a man returning to a place he had emptied. Crispin was home. Wren set down her pen. She capped the ink with the same care she gave everything, because care was the one economy no creditor could seize. Then she listened to her brother's boots cross the hall, too quick, too loud. The walk, of a man performing confidence for an audience of one. She knew the sound of a lie before it reached the door. She had spent her whole life learning it. Whatever he had come to tell her, she thought, it would be dressed in its very best clothes. She was not wrong. He did not come to the breakfast room. That, more than anything, told her the size of it. Crispin summoned her to the library instead, the one room with a door thick enough to muffle raised voices. And when she entered, he stood at the cold hearth with his back to her, still in his traveling coat, turning his hat in his hands as though it had wronged him. "Sit," he said. "I'll stand." She had spent 5 years learning that a person who stands can leave. You've been traveling all night. You may as well say it's standing, too. He turned. He had their mother's coloring and none of her spine, and this morning his handsome face had a gray, sleepless slackness. No amount of arranging could hide. He tried a smile. She watched it fail. "You always did think the worst of me. I keep the accounts, Crispin. I don't have to think." The smile went out entirely, and what was left underneath was the truth. Worse than she had let herself imagine. It came out of him in pieces. Not a confession so much as a spill, the way a cracked jug lets go at once. The London losses had never stopped. He had chased them the way drowning men chase the surface, borrowing against the grange, the land, the very trees, then borrowing again from men who did not lend to gentlemen so much as hunt them. "How much?" Wren said. He named the figure. The room tilted slightly, then righted itself. It was not merely ruin. It was the kind that ended with the family name in the debtors' columns of the papers, Eloan unmarriageable. The tenants turned out, Crispin in the Marshalsea, and the 2 women he had left behind put out into a world with no earthly use for penniless gentlewomen without a character between them. "There is," Crispin said carefully, "a remedy." And here was the thing he had dressed so well. Here was why he had not written it in a letter. Here was why he could not meet her eyes. The debts, it emerged, were no longer scattered among a dozen creditors. In the last month, they had all been quietly bought up, every note, every marker, every ugly promise, and gathered into a single hand. The hand belonged to the Duke of Blackmere. Wren knew the name, the way everyone knew it, the reputation, nothing beneath it. Ambrose Sterne, the Duke of Blackmere, held one of the oldest titles in England, and used it for nothing. He did not sit in the Lords, did not open his London house, kept to his seat in the Black Fen country to the east, miles of water and reed and mist, where the land could not decide whether it was drowned or merely dying, and had not been seen in society for the better part of 6 years. Some said a betrothal that ended in a grave. Some said a temper, some said worse. What every version agreed upon was this: he had no warmth left in him, and no earthly reason to spend a fortune on the debts of a bankrupt Shropshire baronet. "He has made an offer," Crispin said. "Men like that do not make offers," Wren said. "They set terms. The term was a marriage. The Duke would forgive the whole debt, restore the land, and settle a sum on the family besides. Enough to launch Eloan, enough to keep the Grange standing, in exchange for one thing. He would take a daughter of the house to wife." Wren understood at once, with the cold clarity that was her only inheritance, and she understood, too, the thing Crispin was not saying. Of course he would want Eloan. Everyone would assume Eloan. A duke buying a bride would buy a beautiful one. That was the natural order, fixed as the columns in a ledger. She felt the old familiar smallness settle over her. To be, even in her own family's disgrace, the sister no one thought to mention. "You've promised him Eloan," she said. It was not a question. It was arithmetic. Crispin looked at the floor. No. He named the daughter himself, her brother went on, and now he could not stop. In the letter, in his own hand, I offered him a loan. I as good as begged him to take a loan, and he wrote back. He wrote back that he had no use for a pretty child and every use for. He stopped. For what? Wren said quietly. For you. Crispin lifted his head, and for the first time in years he looked at his sister as though she were a person he did not entirely recognize. He asked for you by name, the plain one, the sensible one, he called you. He said he wanted the daughter who kept the accounts. Somewhere in the walls the rain went on with its patient, ruinous work. He wanted the daughter who kept the accounts. Wren stood very still, and beneath the shock, beneath the insult and the fear and the vertiginous weight of it, something else stirred that she had not felt in a very long time. Not hope. She was too clear-eyed for hope. It was closer to curiosity. The sharp, dangerous interest of a woman handed a sum that does not add up. A man who could have anything had looked across the whole grey width of England and asked specifically for the one thing no one else had ever wanted. Why, she meant to find out. When, she said. Crispin swallowed. The carriage comes Thursday. They traveled east for 2 days, out of the Green Hill country, into a flatter, stranger world. Wren had never seen the fens. She watched them arrive through the carriage glass, the land giving up its trees, then its hedges, then its firmness altogether, until there was only a low horizon and a sky too large for it, and water everywhere. In the ditches, the reed-choked meres, standing silver in the fields as though the sea had come in overnight. The air tasted of iron and rot and something green and old. A drowned country, she thought. He has chosen to live in a drowned country. Her whole trousseau fit in one trunk. She carried 4 things that mattered. Her father's ledger, in which his hand still lived, a miniature of the mother she barely remembered, the plain gray gown she wore, and a question she turned over in the dark of the swaying carriage until its edges wore smooth. Why the plain one? Why? Of all the daughters in England, me. Fenwick Hall rose out of the mist on the second evening like something the water had pushed up from below. Old, older than the fashion for beauty, a long, dark house of local stone, its wings reaching low across a moated island as though bracing against the wet. Parts of it were kept with care. The near court raked, the windows sound. Other parts had been let go entirely shuttered and blind, and the 2 conditions sat side by side without apology, so the house seemed 2 houses, one attended, one abandoned, pretending to be one. Wren noticed. Wren always noticed. Someone spends money on the front of this house and none on the rest. She filed it away without yet knowing where it belonged. No crowd received her, no line of gawking servants. A grave, straight-backed woman of 60 met the carriage herself, an iron ring of keys at her waist, and a face schooled to give away nothing. Miss Alderton, I am Mrs. Peveril. I keep the house. A pause, measured to the half-second. His Grace is in the chapel. The vicar is waiting. It was thought. The smallest hesitation, the only crack. It was thought you would wish it done quickly after such a journey. It was thought correctly, Wren said, and something in the housekeeper's face shifted a fraction. Surprise, perhaps, at being answered plainly. The chapel was small and cold and smelled of damp hassocks and beeswax. There were 4 people in it, besides the vicar. Mrs. Peveril, a nervous curate, an old weather-cured land steward who stood so rigidly upright he might have been on parade, and who watched the bride the whole while with a grief he did not bother to hide. And the Duke of Blackmere. Wren had built 100 versions of him on the road east. A brute, a ruin, a monster with a temper worn on the outside. The man who turned from the altar as she entered was none of them, and that was somehow worse. Ambrose Stern was tall and spare, dark-haired and going silver early at the temples, though he could not have been much past 35. He was not handsome in the easy way her brother was. He was something more difficult, a face all planes and shadow, severe, arresting, the kind the eye did not slide past, but snagged upon. His eyes were pale, the cold no color of the fen water, and very still. He held his right hand curled against his side, guarding it, an old habit protecting. An old hurt she could not yet read. And he looked at her. In 5 seasons in 100 ballrooms, Wren had never once been looked at, not truly. Men's eyes had always traveled toward Aloan, or toward the door, or toward anything that was not the plain girl minding the coats. But the Duke looked at her the way she herself looked at a column of figures she suspected of lying, reading her from the drab hem of her gown to the plain pins in her hair, and giving nothing back. It was the most naked she had ever felt while fully clothed, and she made herself stand under it without flinching. Neither of them spoke. He did not welcome her. She did not thank him. The vicar, unnerved by the silence, hurried them through the words. She heard herself answer, and heard him answer, in a low, dry voice that seemed to come from somewhere very far down. When the moment came for a ring, he took her cold hand in his colder one and slid onto her finger a heavy old band, worn smooth, plainly a family thing and plainly not chosen for her. He did not kiss her. He inclined his head a bare degree, as one might acknowledge a contract properly executed, and it was done. In under a quarter of an hour, Wren Alderton, the plain one, the sensible one, the sister who minded the coats, had become the Duchess of Blackmere. Mrs. Peveril led her away to change and to dine alone. The Duke went to his study and did not appear. The true reckoning would come tonight, in whatever room they had prepared for a wedding night. Neither of them had chosen. And Wren, drying her hands in a strange cold house at the edge of a drowned country, made herself a promise. She would not go into that room to be looked at. She would go into it to speak first. They had given her a chamber in the attended wing, warm and well kept, with a fire already burning, and the bed turned down, a room dressed for a wedding night by people who knew there would be nothing of a wedding in it. Wren sat at the edge of the bed in her plain nightgown with a wrapper drawn tight, her hair loose for the first time all day, and she waited, and she rehearsed. She was good at waiting. 5 seasons against ballroom walls, 4 years watching a brother shrink out of his own name. Waiting held no fear for her. What she feared, the whole drowned road east, was hoping. Hope was the one lie she could never catch before it caught her. The connecting door opened without a knock. A man does not knock at a door he owns. The Duke of Blackmere stood there in his shirt-sleeves, a candle in his good hand, and simply regarded her across the warm room. He had the still coiled quality of a man who has taught himself to move rarely and mean it. Whatever society whispered about his temper, she saw no heat in him at all. She saw cold. And cold she understood. Cold could be reasoned with. He came in and set the candle on the mantel. He did not approach the bed. He turned to face her, and she watched him draw breath to speak, to set the terms, to tell the plain Alderton girl exactly what would and would not be required of her, before the Duke could speak a single word. "I have a condition," Wren said. The breath left him unused. One dark brow rose the barest fraction, the first genuine reaction she had drawn from him all day. "You have a condition," he repeated. The dry voice did something at its edges, that in a warmer man might have been the beginning of amusement. "You are aware, madam, that the contracts are signed. Your family's debts are already cancelled." You have, I am afraid, remarkably little left to bargain with." "I am aware of exactly what I have," Wren said. 4 years of tallying every farthing in a failing house had taught her the difference between what a thing is worth and what one can get for it. "I have nothing to bargain with. That is precisely why you will listen. A woman with nothing left to lose is the only honest creature in England, Your Grace. Everyone else is protecting something." He was very still now. She had his whole attention, and it was heavier to hold than she had imagined. "You bought my debts," she went on, and her voice did not shake, because she had spent all the shaking in advance, alone on the road. "You bought my name, the land, my sister's chances, my brother's freedom, and by any reckoning the world would recognize. You have bought me. I will not insult us both by pretending otherwise. I will keep this house. I will keep your accounts if you let me, and I keep them better than any man you employ. I will stand up as your Duchess before whatever world you still trouble to receive. I will be in every particular the law and the ton can name. Your wife, but," he said, "but I want one thing in return, and it is a small thing, and it will cost you no money at all." She rose from the bed then, because a person who stands can leave, and she wished to say this on her feet. She was slight and plain and barefoot on his cold floor, and she looked the Duke directly in his pale eyes and did not blink. "Never lie to me. That is the condition," she said. "That is the whole of it. From this night to the last of them, you will never tell me a lie. Not a large one to deceive me, not a small one to spare me, not a kind one, not a comfortable one. If I ask a thing, and you will not answer, you may refuse me. I will grant you your silences, and never pry into them. But you will not lie. If the answer is ugly, I will have it ugly. If the truth is cruel, I will take the cruelty. I would rather bleed on a true word than be bandaged with a false one every day for the rest of my life." For a long moment the Duke said nothing. He looked at her the way he had looked at her in the chapel, reading, weighing, turning her over, but there was something new beneath it now, some quick movement far down in the still cold of him, and she could not name it, and it unsettled her more than anger would have done. "That is a strange price," he said slowly, "for a woman to name on such a night. Most would ask for security, a settlement beyond a husband's reach, an income he could not revoke, comfort, escape. Instead, you ask me for," the word seemed to cost him to say aloud, "honesty, which cannot be settled in law, nor enforced in any court, nor proven if I choose to break it. The single thing you can never be certain you have received." His gaze sharpened to a point. Why? And there it was. The question she would not answer. The one that led back into a locked room in herself, she had no intention of opening for a stranger she had been married to for 3 hours. She thought, for one vertiginous instant, of a summer garden years past, of a young man with a beautiful, careless smile, of the sound of gentlemen laughing behind a hedge when they believed the plain girl had gone inside. A wager, only a wager who among us can make the Alderton scarecrow believe herself loved, and she felt the old wound turn over, dark and cold, and she set her heel upon it. "You promised me no lies," Wren said. "You did not promise me your whole history, and I have not promised you mine. That is a silence, Your Grace. I told you I would grant you yours. I will thank you to grant me mine." Something moved across his severe face, not quite respect, but adjacent to it. The look of a man who has thrown a stone into what he took for a shallow pool and heard, disconcertingly, no bottom. "You catch a man in his own terms within a minute of setting them," he said. "God help my stewards." "That rather depends," said Wren, before she could stop herself. "Upon your stewards." The Duke went very still. And then he did not laugh. She had the sudden certainty. He had forgotten how it was done, but something crossed his face, brief and involuntary, like light moving over water before the wind takes it and the surface closes again. Gone almost before she saw it, but she had seen it, and she would remember it. He crossed to the mantel and stood looking into the fire, his curled right hand held against his side. When he spoke again, the dryness had gone out of his voice and left something quieter and far more careful in its place. "You should understand what you ask of me," he said, not turning. "You imagine it a small thing, a courtesy, the sort a decent man grants without a second thought. It is not. You are asking the most dangerous thing one person can promise another, of a man with more cause than most to keep his mouth shut. There are truths in this house, madam. Truths in me that would not spare you, that would frighten you back into your brother's ruin within the week, that touch other people living and dead, whom I am not free to lay open to a stranger with a talent for arithmetic." He looked at her over his shoulder, and for the first time she saw something in his face that was not cold, something worn and haunted and very tired. "You want a husband who cannot lie to you. Have you considered, Duchess, that you may not be able to bear a husband who can only tell you the truth?" Wren felt the warning land exactly where he had aimed it. He was not refusing her. He was doing something rarer and more honest than any refusal. He was giving her one last chance to unask the question, and giving it to her truthfully, which was itself the beginning of granting it. She thought of every kind lie she had ever been told. The dressmaker's "How well you look tonight," her brother's "I have a remedy," a young man's warm voice in a summer garden. All her life, people had chosen her comfort over her dignity and called it kindness, and left her the poorer and smaller for it every time. "I have been spared my whole life, Your Grace," she said quietly. "Everyone I have known has been so careful to spare me. I am not asking to be spared. I am asking once before I die, to be told." She lifted her chin. "I will take my chances with your truths. Give me your word." The Duke looked at his plain, penniless, barefoot bride, demanding the one currency he had spent 6 years hoarding, and something in the set of his shoulders changed, some old lock turning over that had rusted shut long before she came. "You have it," he said, "on my name, and it is a very old name, so it is not nothing. I will never lie to you, Wren." Her own name, for the first time, in that low, grave voice. "Not to deceive you, not to spare you, not once." He inclined his head, precisely as he had at the altar, and crossed to the connecting door, and paused there with his good hand upon it. "Sleep," he said. "No one will trouble you tonight, not even your husband, a beat. You have had a longer day than you know, and a longer year is coming than either of us has bargained for." The door closed behind him. Wren stood alone in the firelight a long time, her heart going hard, the heavy old ring cold on her hand. She had come into the room to speak first, and she had won the one thing she wanted. So why, staring into the dying fire, did she feel less like a woman who had won a promise, and more like one who had just pried the lid, very slightly, off a box she could not see the bottom of? "A longer year is coming than either of us has bargained for." It was, she would realize a great deal later, the first entirely true thing anyone had said to her in years. She woke to a world made of white. The fen mist had risen in the night and swallowed everything past the near court, so that Fenwick Hall seemed to float in a soft blind nowhere, and for a moment she did not know where she was or who she had become. Then the weight of the ring reminded her. She dressed in her plain gray. She had nothing else, and did not much care to pretend she had, and went to find her husband, and instead found the house. It was worse, close to, than the two-faced front had promised. The attended rooms were warm and sound. The rest was a slow surrender to the wet. Wren walked corridors where the damp had bloomed the wallpaper black past, shrouded furniture and shuttered windows, and she read the house the way her father had taught her to read a smile, for the sum that lay beneath it. And the sum did not come right. This was the seat of one of the oldest dukedoms in England. The Duke had lately laid out an enormous fortune on the debts of a family 100 miles distant, a sum that spoke of very deep coffers. So, where was the money? Why was half his own house drowning while he had gold to spare on strangers? Someone is being lied to in this place, she thought, running one finger along a swollen sill, and it came away black with rot. And it is not me. He promised me that much. She breakfasted alone. The Duke, Mrs. Peveril said, rose before light and kept to his own affairs. But the housekeeper lingered by the sideboard longer than duty required, and Wren, who had spent her life among people who talked around things, recognized a woman working herself up to talk around one now. "You'll forgive me for saying, Your Grace," Mrs. Peveril said at last, low, "that we did not rightly know what to expect. When word came that he was to marry, the keys shifted at her waist. There has not been a lady in this house in 6 years. Not since—" She stopped. The silence had a shape to it, and old grief worn into a groove. "Since the one who drowned," Wren said gently. It was the version society told. A betrothal, a grave. She had turned it over on the road east. Mrs. Peveril's face closed like a door. "I keep the house, Your Grace. I do not keep the stories." Which was, Wren noted, not a denial, not a confirmation, and not, she was almost certain, a lie, a silence. She had promised to respect those. She let it lie. But the housekeeper paused again at the threshold and offered, unasked, one thing more. "He is not what they say of him," she said. "Whatever else you hear in this house, and you will hear things, you remember that I said that first." And she was gone before Wren could ask what things, leaving the warning hanging in the misted air, like the smell of the fen. She found the Duke in his study near noon. It was the one room in the abandoned wing that was warm, a deliberate island of order in the ruin, walls of books, a great desk beneath the window. He was not working. He stood at that window with his back to her, his curled right hand at his side, and the fixed stillness of him made her think of a man standing guard over a thing he could not name. "You walked the house," he said, without turning. Not a question. "I did, and here it was." The first live test of the bargain, and she felt the temptation at once, the lifelong reflex to soften, to be pleasant, to be spared and to spare in turn. She set it aside. He had promised her hard truths. The least she owed him was her own. "Your house is drowning, Your Grace, and you are paying someone very well to let it," Wren said. "Half these rooms could be saved for a fraction of what you laid out on my family's debts last month. Either you do not know that, which I find difficult to credit, of a man clever enough to unsettle me twice in one night, or you know it and cannot say why, which is a silence, and I will respect it. But I will not pretend I did not see it. You did not marry a woman who could pretend not to see." He turned then. He looked at her across the warm room, and deep in the pale, level eyes there was that quick underwater movement again, the live thing beneath the ice. "No," he agreed. "I did not." He studied her a moment. "You want to see the accounts." "More than I have wanted anything in a long while," Wren said honestly, and surprised them both. The Duke crossed to the desk. He rested his good hand flat upon a locked drawer, and for a moment she thought he would open it and hand her the whole ruin of his affairs then and there. He did not. Instead, he said in that low, careful voice, a thing she would turn over for many nights, "After my cousin keeps my accounts, Merrick Stern. He has kept them 6 years since I was in no condition to keep them myself, and he has never once, in all that time, given me cause to take them back." A pause, precisely waited, and she heard the truth in it, fighting with something else, some loyalty or fear or long weariness. He arrives at week's end to look over his cousin's new Duchess. He is charming, Wren. Everyone says so. He will be kind to you. He will be so very kind to you. The pale eyes held hers. "I promised I would never lie to you. So I will tell you this, and you will do with it as your arithmetic sees fit. When you meet my cousin, watch his hands, not his face, and trust nothing that costs him nothing to give." Somewhere below, water dripped steadily into a house that should not have been dying. "Is your cousin robbing you, Your Grace?" Wren asked, very softly. For the first time since she had met him, the Duke of Blackmere looked away from her before he answered. And that, from a man who had promised never to lie, was its own kind of answer. "That," he said, "is a silence." And Wren Alderton, who had spent her whole life learning to read the sum beneath the smile, understood that her longer year had just begun. He gave her the accounts the next morning. Not all of them. Not the locked drawer, not whatever lived behind that quiet refusal, but the household and estate books, 6 years of great leather-bound volumes written in another man's hand. The old land steward who had stood so rigid at the wedding carried them into a small, unused parlor and set them down with a reverence, and Wren understood, watching his gnarled hands smooth the covers, that here was a man kept from these books for 6 years. His name was Present Bates. Present, a fen name, from a family that had drained and diked this drowned country since before the Sterns had a title. He had been land steward at Fenwick 40 years. Merrick Stern kept a beautiful book, The Hand, elegant and confident. The columns ruled straight as a hedge, every entry balanced to the penny, every quarter closed clean. It was one of the loveliest sets of accounts she had ever seen. Which was the first thing wrong with it. Real accounts are ugly. They have the mud of the world on them, crossings out, disputed sums, the tenant forgiven a bad year, the little private wars of a great house marking the margins. Her own ledgers had been ugly. Wren had never seen a true account of a working estate that was beautiful, because the truth is not beautiful. The truth is only ever correct, a different thing entirely, and far rarer and far harder to counterfeit. This book was beautiful. Someone had made it beautiful on purpose. She did not go hunting the theft directly. That was the amateur's mistake, the one Merrick would be armored against. She did what her father had taught her. She did not read the book against itself. She read it against the world. She sent for Bates and walked the estate. She had him show her the drainage. 6 years of accounts recorded a steady, handsome outflow to a concern called the Averill Fen and Marsh Company, for new cuts, a pump mill, the upkeep of the great dike that held the mere from the house. Thousands of pounds. Bates took her out along the water's edge to show her the works. There were no new cuts. The pump mill was a rotten skeleton that had not turned in a decade. The great dike was slumped and seeping in a dozen places, held together with faggots of cut reed and the prayers of the tenants, and it was this failing dike that was letting the water in beneath the abandoned wing, drowning the house from below. "Tell me about the Averill Company, Bates." Wren said, standing on the broken dike with the wind off, the mere pulling at her skirts. The old man's weathered face worked, and then 40 years of loyalty cracked, and the truth came out in a rush. "There's no company, Your Grace, or, if there is, I've never seen it swing a spade. Merrick 3 winters gone that the dike wanted £60 of proper work, or we'd lose the house, and next quarter day my wages were cut and my son turned off the home farm, and I never said it again." His voice broke. "I let the house drown. I knew, and I let it, because I am old and afraid, and there's no one left above me who'll hear a word against that man." Wren looked at the drowning dike, and the old man weeping in the wind for a thing he had been made complicit in, and felt something in her go very cold and very clear, the clarity she had felt once, finding £9 stolen by a wine merchant. "I will hear it, Bates," she said. "I am the one left above him now." She went back to the beautiful book, and now she knew where to stand to see it, and once she saw it, she could not stop. It was elegant work. She granted him that, the way one professional grants another, the false company, the surveys, that were pure invention. A dead man kept on the wage book 4 years after his burial, his wages walking quietly out the door each quarter into Merrick Stern's pocket. Not one great theft, 1,000 small ones, patient and disciplined and beautiful, bleeding the oldest dukedom in England, a little at a time for 6 years. For exactly as long as a grieving duke had been too broken to look at his own books, and too dependent on the one kind cousin who had offered to look at them for him. By the 3rd night she had it, not the whole, which would take weeks, but enough to put a figure to it, and the figure was very large, and still growing, quarter by quarter, page by beautiful page. She sat back with the candles guttering and her father's voice in her ear, learned to read the sum beneath the smile, and understood the shape of the thing she had married into a duke who could not look. A cousin who had made very sure he never had to. A house drowning to feed a lie, and a wife who had just spent 3 nights learning to read exactly the sum the charming Mr. Reed. Merrick Stern had spent 6 careful years making certain no one would ever read again. He was coming on Friday. Wren looked at the incriminating pages spread across the table in the candlelight, and for the first time since the carriage came for her, she was afraid. Not the old worn fear of being unwanted, but a new and sharper thing. She had just become the single most dangerous person in the house to the most dangerous man in it, and he did not yet know she could read. She meant to keep it that way as long as she possibly could. He arrived on Friday in a curricle far too fine for Fen roads, and he came into that drowning house like sunlight, and Wren understood, within a minute of meeting him, exactly how he had got away with it for 6 years. Merrick Stern was everything his cousin was not. Where the Duke was all shadow and stillness, Merrick was warmth and motion and light. A handsome, open-faced man of perhaps 40, laughing eyes, easy, generous smile, and the rare gift of making whomever he spoke to feel, briefly, like the most interesting creature in England. He crossed the hall with both hands outstretched. "So this is she." He took Wren's hand in both of his before she could prevent it, warm and firm and lingering. The Duchess who has turned Fenwick upside down. "Cousin, you sly creature, you never said she was." He caught himself with a charming, self-deprecating laugh, as though he had been about to say beautiful, and thought better of insulting them both with so obvious a lie. It was deftly done. A small kindness that cost him nothing, and flattered her more than flattery would have. Trust nothing, that costs him nothing to give. Wren watched his hands. They were beautiful hands. She saw where the confident ledger script came from, and never quite still. They touched his cousin's shoulder, the back of a chair, Mrs. Gwed, Peveril's sleeve as he greeted her by name and asked after her rheumatism and remembered, God help him, the name of her married daughter. Every touch, a small deposit, a coin laid against some future withdrawal, an investment in being loved. She had never seen a man work so hard, so gracefully, so invisibly, and she thought, here is a man who understood, as I did at 17, that the world runs on performance, and who, unlike me, decided to become the finest performer in the room. I hope, Merrick said, over dinner all warm concern, that you have not been letting my cousin bury you in his dreary affairs already. He works you at the accounts, I hear. You must let me take that tedium off your hands. I have kept the wretched books so long I could balance them in my sleep. The smile, the warm eyes. Truly, it would be my very great pleasure to relieve you of them. There it was. Not a demand. Merrick never demanded. Merrick offered, so that to refuse him was to seem the ungracious one. He was reaching with the lightest of hands to take the books back before she could read them. Which meant he did not yet know. She had, Wren, felt the Duke go still. At the head of the table, she did not look at him. This was hers to play. How kind, she said, and made her voice light and her eyes a little vague, and reached for the dullness she had worn like armor through 5 seasons. But His Grace has only given me the household books, Mr. Stern. The linens and the candles and the fish for Fridays. I shouldn't dare touch the estate. I haven't the head for anything grand. Merrick laughed, delighted, and something behind the laughing eyes eased, and she watched the exact moment he filed her away, as harmless, as dull as the plain, unthreatening creature the world had always taken her for. Alderton, Merrick mused, turning his wine, his eyes on her with a warmth that had very subtly changed temperature. Shropshire, was it not? I feel I know the name. He smiled. Were you not the young lady in that little business at the Harcourt ball, some years ago? There was a... He waved a graceful, apologetic hand. A wager, was it not, among some of the young bucks? It made quite a stir, in a small way, that season. The smile did not waver, the warm eyes did not blink. But I dare say I misremember. It was so long ago, and I am sure it was some other plain little Shropshire girl entirely. The dining room went white and airless around her. He knew, of course he knew. It was Merrick's trade to know, to gather the shameful secrets of everyone in reach, and hold them warm against the day they might be spent. He had done his homework as thoroughly as she had done hers, found the one buried thing that could unmake her, and laid it on the table between the candles, smilingly in front of her husband. Watch what I can do to you, plain girl with a single kind sentence. Wren's hands were perfectly steady in her lap. She had spent a lifetime learning to keep her hands steady. But she could not make herself speak, and the silence stretched, and the old humiliation rose up her throat like floodwater, and across the table Merrick Stern watched her drown with the kindest smile in England. You misremember, said the Duke of Blackmere. His voice was very quiet. It fell into the room like a stone into a still mirror. Wren had almost forgotten he was there. So silent had he sat through the whole performance, and she turned to him now and found him not looking at her at all, but at his cousin, and his pale eyes were no longer still. Something moved in them, deep and cold and terrible. The thing under the ice come up at last, toward the surface. You misremember Merrick. It was some other girl entirely. You will not raise it again. He set down his glass. At my table we do not misremember people's griefs in order to see them flinch. I have lost my taste for the sport. Holy this year, it was the most words Wren had heard him string together since the wedding night, and every one was true, and every one a wall thrown up between her and the flood. And Merrick heard the truth in them too, and for one flickering instant, so brief she might have imagined it, the charming mask slipped, and underneath it she saw the thing that lived in Merrick Stern. Not warmth, not light, but a cold and patient calculation, recalibrating as a man recalculates a sum that has come out wrong. Then the smile was back, wider than ever. Forgive me, Cousin Wren, I am a fool with my tongue, too much wine and a long road. Let us speak of pleasanter things. And he did. Charmingly for the rest of the meal, and no one watching would have seen anything but the ordinary awkwardness of new family finding its feet. But that night, Wren lay awake in the dark, with her heart going hard, and understood two things with perfect clarity. The first was that Merrick now knew there was a war, even if not yet, that she had found his ledgers, and a man who could reach so precisely for her deepest wound over the fish course would not scruple at anything. The second was harder to hold, and warmer, and far more frightening. Her husband, the cold Duke, who had promised her nothing but the truth, had watched a stranger try to drown her at his own table, and he had reached into the flood and pulled her out with the only thing he had ever promised her: "You will not raise it again." She pressed her cold hand flat over the frightened knocking of her heart, and thought, oh, no, not that. Anything but that. She had asked him never to lie to her. She had not thought to ask him not to make her fall in love with him. The great cold came down out of the north in the second week of Merrick's visit, and it came for the Duke's hand. Wren had marked the hand from the first, the way he curled it against his side, wrote nothing, signed nothing, the way Merrick had made himself so indispensable in the signing of things. She had not asked why, because it was so plainly one of the deep silences. But on the coldest night of that hard week, walking the abandoned wing, unable to sleep, she heard from behind the study door a sound she knew. She knew it because she had heard her father make it, at the end, when the gout was in him, and his pride would not let him cry out where anyone could hear, the sound of a strong man being broken slowly by his own body, in the dark, alone, where no one would see. She did not knock. A person in that much pain cannot answer a knock with grace, and grace was the last thing she meant to cost him. She opened the door. He was at the desk, bent over his ruined right hand as though it were a wounded animal he was trying to gentle. The fire had died to embers. He could not build it up one-handed. She realized with the cold that had seized the other, and it had got into the old injury and was tearing him apart. His face when he lifted it was gray and stripped, nothing left but the naked fact of pain and, close behind it, a worse thing, shame. The shame of a proud man seen exactly as he did not wish to be seen. "Get out," he said. It came through his teeth, Wren. "Get out." "No," said Wren, and shut the door behind her. She did not go to him with pity. She had learned, at her father's bedside, what pity does to a proud man in pain. It finishes what the pain began. Pity was the kind lie of the body. There, poor thing. And he had married a woman who did not deal in kind lies. So she did not soften her face. She built the fire up hard and fast with her own hands, the way she had built 1,000 cheap fires in a failing house, then found the brandy Merrick kept for himself, poured a great deal into a glass, and set it at the Duke's good hand. "Drink that," she said, "not to be kind. You are no use to me shaking, and I have a question about the Averill Company that will not keep till morning." He looked up at her through his pain, and she watched him understand what she was doing, that she was handing him, instead of pity, a task, treating the greatest humiliation of his life as though it were merely a ledger come out wrong and wanting balance, and something in his gray, ravaged face cracked clean across. He drank the brandy. Then Wren took from the grate a smooth, flat hearthstone gone warm through, wrapped it in flannel torn from her own petticoat, and took his ruined right hand in both of hers without asking leave, folding the warm stone into the cold, clawed fingers. He went rigid at the touch. No one had touched that hand in 6 years. It was a terrible thing. The wrongness of the bones healed all crooked, the deep scarring across the palm and into the wrist. But she did not flinch, because she had trained flinching out of herself long ago, and because she did not wish to flinch from any part of him at all. The heat went into the seized muscles, and she felt them let go. One by one, felt the breath leave him in a long shudder as the pain loosed its grip. He slumped back and shut his eyes, and for a long while there was no sound but the fire and the slow evening out of his breathing, while Wren knelt beside him and offered only her steady, unfrightened presence. And then, with his eyes still closed, in a low, rough voice she had never heard him use, the Duke of Blackmere gave her a truth she had never asked for. "It was the ice," he said. She went very still. The mere freezes, some winters, past the old dike, hard enough to walk on, and rotten as sin in patches, and every soul born in this country knows which patches, and no soul born outside it does. He drew a breath. Her name was Cosima. "My betrothed. The one they say I grieve." His mouth twisted on the word. "My father chose her. There was money and old blood in it, and neither of us wanted it. And I did not know. This is a thing I have told no living person. I did not know until far too late, that she loved another man, and that the two of them had planned that winter to run." She held his hand and his silence both, and let him say it in the dark. She went out onto the ice at night to meet him. She did not know the rotten patches. She was as much a stranger to this country as you were 3 weeks ago. I saw the lantern from the house. I did not know it was her. His voice had gone flat, the flatness of a wound touched too often to bleed. The ice took her before I reached her, and took me when I tried to reach her through it, and kept my hand. I got a grip on her once, and this hand would not close, and she was lost beneath the ice. 6 years I have been pitied by all of England for the loss of a great love I never felt, for a woman who died running from me to another man. A terrible ghost of a smile. You see now why I found your condition so dangerous. I could tell no one. The truth was not only mine. She has a mother living who believes her daughter drowned an innocent bride, and I will not take even that false comfort from her. So I let them build their pretty tragic story over the real one, and hated every hour of it. And now at last Wren understood everything, why a man drowning inside a lie had reached across the whole width of England for the one woman who had built herself around the truth, why he had granted her impossible condition on the first night on his ancient name. She understood the shape of her husband entire, as one understands a sum that has finally come right. "And Merrick," she said softly, "was the only one you could bear to have near you. Because Merrick knew, Merrick was there. Merrick never once asked you to perform the grief you didn't feel. Merrick knows all of it, has always known all of it. And Merrick has spent 6 years being the one man on earth I did not have to lie to." His pale eyes met hers, and there was something in them, now worse than pain, the beginning of understanding, the thing she had worked out over the beautiful ledgers and not yet found the moment to tell him. "You are about to tell me," he said slowly, reading her face the way she read his silences, "that the one man I trusted with the truth has been using it, all this while, to rob me blind." "Yes," said Wren, "I am." "Bah!" So she told him, kneeling there with his broken hand warm between her own. She gave him the truth she had found, the false company and the drowned dyke and the dead man on the wage book, plainly without softening a word, because the plain, hard truth given without pity was the only love she knew how to offer. When she had finished, he was silent a long while. "How much?" he said at last. It was, she thought, exactly the question she had asked her brother in a cold library 100 miles in a lifetime ago. She told him the figure. The Duke looked into the fire, and the last of the softness went out of his face, and what replaced it was not the cold stillness she had first taken. For his nature, the stillness she knew now, had only ever been ice-grown over the wound, but something hotter and cleaner, and far more dangerous. The look of a man handed after 6 years a reason to care again, and deciding to spend all of it at once. "He comes to the study tomorrow at noon," the Duke said quietly, "to go over the quarter's accounts with me, as he has done every quarter for 6 years. He turned his head and looked at his plain, penniless, unfrightened wife, kneeling in the firelight, holding his ruined hand as though it were worth the holding, and for the first time since she had come to Fenwick, Wren saw the Duke of Blackmere smile. A real one, slow and terrible and entirely without warmth for the man it was meant for. "Wren," he said, "how would you like to help me balance a book?" She did not sleep. She spent the night doing the one thing she had ever been truly good at, and by the gray-drowned dawn, she had built her husband a weapon out of arithmetic, every false entry and phantom repair set against Bates' plain sworn account of the ruin it was meant to prevent, the dead man's wages traced from the burial register to the ledger, the whole beautiful crime laid bare and ugly and correct at last. And then, because she had married a man who had trusted the wrong person once and could not afford to do it twice, she did the thing that would matter most. She made 3 copies. One for the Duke, one for herself, and one she pressed before full light into the hands of present Bates, whose son was already riding hard for the London mail before Merrick had so much as rung for his morning chocolate, carrying it to Mr. Dar. Threlfall, the Duke's solicitor, a man Merrick had kept carefully at arm's length for 6 years. Whatever happens here at noon, she thought, sealing it, the truth is already past his reach. He cannot burn what is gone to London. He cannot charm a document he cannot touch. A lie can be argued with, charmed away, drowned in warmth. But a true thing written down and put somewhere safe is the one weapon a man like Merrick Stern cannot fight, because it does not care whether it is liked. At noon, Merrick came to the study, warm and smiling, the quarter's beautiful book under his arm. He checked on the threshold at the sight of Wren, seated at the great desk, with the ledgers open and the Duke at the window, with his back to the room. But he recovered in an instant. Merrick always recovered in an instant, and the smile widened, the warmth coming on like a lamp. "Ah, a family occasion, cousin. You did not say the Duchess would sit in. How charming. Though I confess, Wren, my dear, I fear you'll find the estate accounts a good deal drier than the fish bill. Sit down, Merrick," said the Duke without turning. Something in the flatness of it stopped him. Merrick sat. He set his beautiful book on the desk, folded his restless hands upon it, and waited. And Wren watched the calculation begin behind the laughing eyes. "My wife," said the Duke, "has been reading the accounts, Has she? Merrick's warmth did not flicker, but his eyes flicked to the open ledgers and to Wren's fair-copied pages beside them, and she watched him grasp in half a second precisely what they were. How industrious of her. Cousin, I did warn you. A clever wife is a treasure, but you mustn't let her tire herself with matters that— There is no Averill company, said Wren. She said it quietly, not looking up. She looked down at the beautiful lying columns and began, in her plain, steady voice, to read him the truth. His own crime, entry by entry, quarter by quarter, 6 years of it in the flat, unhurried tone of a woman reading a butcher's bill. She gave him not one warm handhold of anger to charm his way out through. She simply read the sum aloud, correct at last, and let it sit in the room and be true. And as she read, she watched the most extraordinary thing, Merrick Stern trying every door in the room and finding them one after another, locked. He tried warmth, a rueful laugh. My dear Wren, you have quite misunderstood the workings of a great estate, she read on. He tried condescension, the technical fog. Of course a lady could not be expected to grasp. She met each false figure with the true one. Bates's sworn word, the burial register, the drowned dyke he could not undrown. Growing colder, he tried to make it his word against hers, the trusted cousin of 6 years against the bride of 3 weeks. And the Duke spoke once from the window. I believe her, Merrick. On my name, which you know I do not spend lightly. And that door closed, too, because the one thing Merrick had always relied upon, the Duke's grief-drowned willingness not to look, was finally gone. So Merrick reached at the last for the only weapon he had left, the one he had held warm in his beautiful hands for 6 years against just such a day. You should be very careful, cousin, he said. The warmth all gone now. What lay beneath it the cold, patient calculation she had glimpsed over the fish. About the truths you choose to believe, and the ones you choose to tell. There are stories about this house the world has been kind enough to leave buried. A girl on the ice, and why she was out on it, and who she was running to, that a grieving mother in Bath still believes were other than what they were. It would be a great pity. The smile came back, ghastly now. If the strain of all this were to loosen someone's tongue. If the world were to learn what a sham the great Blackmere tragedy always— It was a wager, said the Duke. Merrick stopped. The Duke turned from the window at last, and came slowly across the room, his ruined right hand at his side, and he did not look at Merrick at all. He looked at Wren, and told the truth to the one person he had promised it to, in front of the one who had thought to weaponize it. Cosima did not love me. She died running to another man, and I could not hold her through the ice, and for 6 years I have let the world pity me for a grief I never felt, and hated the lie of it every hour. He said it plainly, to his wife, and Wren's breath caught. There, now you may tell whom you like, Merrick. Print it in the papers. Write to every gossip in London. You have nothing left to sell, because I have just given it away. His pale eyes were terrible and calm. That is the difficulty with building your power upon a man's secret, cousin. It lasts exactly as long as he is more afraid of the truth than of you. And I find— he glanced once at the plain woman who had taught him the trick of it— that I am no longer afraid of the truth at all. The silence in the study was absolute. Merrick looked from the Duke to the fair-copied pages to the woman who had read him his ruin in the tone of a fishbill, and Wren watched the last of the charm fall away like a coat dropped on a floor, and underneath it, nothing warm at all, only a small, cold, frightened man who had spent 6 years being loved by everyone and never once meant a word of it. You have no proof that would stand, he said. and his voice had lost its music. His restless hands moved toward the ledger on the desk, to seize it, to tear it, to feed the whole beautiful lie to the study fire. "It is your clever little wife's fancy, against 6 years of my faithful. The originals went to Mr. Threlfall in London on the morning mail," said Wren some hours ago. "Under his Grace's seal and my hand." She met his eyes plainly, without warmth and without fear. "You may burn everything on this desk, Mr. Stern. It will change nothing at all. That is rather the point of a true thing written down. It does not need to be here to be true." And she watched the exact moment Merrick Stern understood that he had lost, not to the Duke's grief which he had managed for 6 years, nor to the Duke's rage which he could have charmed, but to the one thing in all the world he had never learned to fight, because he had never possessed it. The Duke rang the bell. Bates came. Bates, who had waited 40 years, 6 of them in silence for this, and who wept openly now and unashamed. Merrick Stern was put out of Fenwick Hall within the hour, with a single bag and a horse, and the Duke's flat promise that Mr. Tott Threlfall would pursue the full sum through every court in England, and that the only mercy on offer was leave to run before the constables were sent for. He had better run far and fast, and never once speak the name of Blackmere again. He went. The curricle that had come in like sunlight went out into the grey drizzle of the drowned country, and did not come back. Wren stood at the study window beside her husband and watched it go, and felt the whole house go still around her, the true stillness this time, the stillness of a held breath let out, and understood that the war she had walked into on her wedding night was over, and she had won it with the only weapon she had ever owned. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the cold sill. She had spent 3 weeks being the most dangerous person in the house, and had not, until now, let herself feel how frightened she had been. The Duke saw. Of course he saw. She had married a man who, once he chose to look, saw everything too. "You are shaking," he said. "Yes," said Wren, because it was true. He did not offer her a platitude, or tell her it was over, or that she was safe, or any of the kind, smooth things another man would have reached for. He reached out instead with his ruined right hand, the broken one, that could not close, that no one had touched, in 6 years, until she took it up by the fire and laid it open and scarred and trembling slightly itself over both of her shaking ones. It could not grip. It would never grip again, but it could rest there, warm and broken and true over her hands, and it did. "I know," he said, "so am I." And that Wren thought that, and not the ledgers, and not the reckoning, and not the ruin of Merrick Stern, was the most dangerous thing that had happened to her in the whole of that long, long year. Spring came slowly to the fen, grudgingly, from below, the water going down an inch at a time, and through it Wren kept the accounts, all of them now, in her own ugly, honest, correct hand, and she kept her husband, or rather they kept each other, in the wary, unspoken way of 2 people who had each spent a lifetime learning that the safest thing to want is nothing at all. They did not speak of the hand over hers on the window-sill, nor of the truth he had given her by the fire, nor of the way something had changed in the architecture of their days ever since. The way he now built the study fire high before she came down, so she should never be cold. The way she now left the study door open when she worked, so he should never have to knock to reach her. They did not need to speak of it. It was simply, quietly, true. But there was one truth left, and it was hers. And it had sat between them, unopened, since the wedding night, the silence she had claimed, the why she had refused him, the locked room in herself she had told him he was not free to enter. He never asked. That was the thing that undid her in the end. He had every right. She had opened all his silences, one by one, and knelt in the truth of his ruin, and never once used it against him. And still he never asked her for hers. He simply granted it, day after day, and waited, with the terrible patience of a man who has learned to want nothing, for a door he would never force. So she opened it herself. On a soft gray evening, at the turn of spring, in the study, with the fire high and the door open, Wren set down her pen and told the Duke of Blackmere the truth about the garden. "I was 19, she said, my second season. There was a young man, beautiful and kind to me, or seeming kind, which I did not yet know was a different thing. For 1 fortnight he made me believe a man might look at the plain Alderton girl and see something worth the looking. And I believed him, every word, because I wanted to, and because no one had yet taught me to read the sum beneath a smile." The Duke sat very still. He did not reach for her. He knew she thought exactly how much stillness she needed, and gave her all of it. It was a wager, she said, got up over cards, on which of them could make the ugly one fall in love. He won it, collected it in the garden, his friends behind the hedge to witness, because a wager wants a witness, and I was still inside it when they began to laugh. I heard all of it, the sum, the terms, my own name. She looked down at her hands. I did not weep. I have never wept over it, not once then or since. I simply went home, and understood all at once and forever that the world runs on performance, that kindness is only ever a costume, and that the most dangerous thing a person like me can do is believe, because belief is the wager they are always trying to win. That is why, Wren said, and now at last her steady voice was not quite steady. I asked you never to lie to me, not because I am brave or good, because I am a coward, Ambrose. I decided at 19 that I would rather have nothing true than risk one more beautiful lie, and I lived 6 years inside that decision, alone and safe, and so very small. And then a man I had never met bought my debts and married me in a quarter of an hour, and I was so frightened of a whole life of not knowing whether one word he said was real, that I made him promise the one thing that could keep me from ever having to be brave. I asked for the truth because I was too much a coward to risk hope. She made herself look up at him. There. That is my silence. That is the whole, ugly sum of it. You may have it now. For a long moment the Duke said nothing. Then he rose and came around the desk and did the thing she had once done for him by the fire. He knelt, stiffly bracing on his good hand, until his gray eyes were level with hers. And he took her 2 hands into his one whole one and rested his ruined one over the top, so that her hands were held between the broken and the sound of him, and he said, in the low, grave voice that had promised her the truth on the first night, I am going to tell you something now, and you are going to have the great misfortune of being entirely unable to disbelieve it, because you made me promise, on my ancient name, on the very first night, never to lie to you, not to deceive you, not to spare you, not once. And I have not. Have I? You have tested it. You know it is true. Yes, Wren whispered. I know it is true. Then hear the one thing I have to say, and know it for exactly what it is. His hand tightened over hers. I did not marry you to settle a debt, Wren. I told your brother I wanted the sensible daughter who kept the accounts, and that was true, and not the whole of it. My man of business made inquiries before ever the letter was written, and among a great deal of dull information he brought me one thing that was not. A plain, elder girl who ran a failing estate single-handed, caught out 3 tradesmen in their cheating, and had once been made the victim of a cruel and public wager, and had walked out of that garden with her chin up, shed no tear, and gone home and balanced the household books that same night. His gray eyes held hers, nothing cold in them now, because the ice was all melted and gone. I read that and thought, there is a woman lied to by the whole world, exactly as I have been, who has refused to become a liar herself. The one person in England who might survive being married to a man with nothing left to give but the truth. I did not ask for you because you were plain, or sensible, or cheap. I asked because you were the only honest creature I could find in a world of beautiful lies. And I have spent this whole year falling completely in love with you, and now you cannot even do me the courtesy of doubting it because I promised. Wren stared at him. The thing she had refused to feel for 6 years, the thing she had built a whole condition, a whole marriage, a whole armored life to keep herself safe from, rose up in her chest, enormous and terrifying and impossible to argue with, because he was right. God help her, he was right. She could not disbelieve him. She had made certain of it. She had demanded, on her wedding night, the one gift that made it impossible ever again to protect herself from being loved. That was cruel, she said, and her voice broke entirely, at last, after 6 dry years. To use my own condition against me like that. It was true, said the Duke. You told me you would rather bleed on a true word than be bandaged by a false one. His broken hand moved against her cheek, and caught wonderingly the first tear she had shed since she was 19 years old. I am only giving you what you asked for, Duchess. I love you. It is true. You cannot make it not be true. That is the whole terrible power of the thing you demanded of me, and I would not give it back for the world. And Wren Alderton, who had walked into a stranger's study on her wedding night, to speak first, to arm herself, to make certain she could never be deceived, began finally to weep, not from grief and not from shame, but from the undeniable, entirely unliable fact of being for the first time in her whole unremarkable life truly and completely seen. She leaned forward into her husband's arms, into the broken hand, and the whole one both, and said, the only thing left in the world that was true. I love you too, said Wren, and you have no way at all of knowing whether to believe me. No, the Duke of Blackmere agreed, and she felt him smile against her hair, the real one, the whole one, the one the world had not seen in 6 years. I shall simply have to take it on faith. It seems only fair that one of us should have to. They were married a second time that summer, quietly, in the little fen chapel where the first grim quarter hour had made them strangers, though this time there was no contract and no debt and no bought bride, only 2 people who had chosen with their eyes open and the truth between them to stay. Wren did not wear grey. Eloan came from Shropshire, married herself by then to a decent, devoted young clergyman, and wept through the whole service and meant every tear. Crispin did not come, which Wren still preferred. He had been settled a small income on condition he stay clear of card-rooms and creditors both, and kept to it about half the time, which was for Crispin a triumph. Present Bates gave the Duchess away, straight as a dyke, and prouder than any duke in England, and Mrs. Peveril wept into her keys and pretended she had not. Merrick Sterne was never seen in England again. Mr. Threlfall pursued the sum through the courts, and recovered a great deal of it, and what could not be recovered the estate no longer needed, for a house no longer quietly bled dry has a way of paying its own debts. The last anyone heard, he had gone abroad, to some warm foreign city where no one yet knew his kindness was a costume, to begin the long, patient work of being loved by strangers all over again. Wren did not think of him often. She had beaten him with the one thing he never understood, that a true thing does not care whether it is liked. The dike held. The pump mill turned. The east wing dried and was made good, and became, in time, the warmest part of the house, for the Duke had a notion of setting the sunniest of the rescued rooms aside as a place where the account books of Blackmere might be kept, in the light, in an honest, ugly hand. And on a gold evening, at the very end of that long year, Wren sat at the great desk going over the quarter's figures, which were up and clean and correct and beautiful in the only way she had ever trusted, the way of being true, when her husband came in from writing the mended boundaries of his drying land, and rested his ruined right hand upon her shoulder, where it could not grip but could only rest, warm and broken, and hers. "Are you auditing me again, Duchess?" he asked, and she heard the smile in it. "Someone must," said Wren. "You spent an indefensible sum on the new pump mill. The fen was drowning my house. The fen has been drowning this house for 400 years. It managed the previous 394 without a Dutch engine that costs more than the curate." He laughed freely, now he had relearned the trick of it that year, and it filled the room, and took the pen from her honest ink-stained fingers, and set it down, and turned her chair, and drew her up out of it, and into his arms, into the broken hand and the whole one both. "The numbers will keep," said the Duke of Blackmere. "It is not yet 6 o'clock," said Wren, though she was already leaning into him. "I am a duke," he said against her hair. "I am permitted to be irresponsible before 6 o'clock, provided my wife does not enter it in the ledger." She rested her head over his heart, listened to the steady, ordinary, entirely true beat of it, and thought, as she still sometimes did in the safe, warm evenings of a cold library 100 miles away, and a carriage sent for the plain daughter, and a whole society leaning in to watch her weep. She thought of the wager in the garden, and the 6 dry armored years, and the frightened woman who had walked into this very room to speak first because she did not dare to hope. She had asked, on that first night, for nothing in the world but never to be lied to, because she had believed then that the truth was the most a woman like her could ever hope to be given. She had been wrong about that, as it turned out. It had only ever been the beginning. There is a cruelty worse than being unwanted, for to be unwanted, a person must first be seen. All her life the world had looked past Wren Alderton, on its way to something brighter. And then a man who could have had anything in England had looked across the whole width of it and asked, by name, for the plain one, the sensible one, the girl who kept the accounts, not in spite of what she was, but because of it, and had promised her the truth, and given it every day, until she could no longer pretend she did not know exactly how, completely and how forever, she was loved. The plainest lady in 3 counties leaned into her husband's arms in the last gold light of a drying country, in a house that was no longer drowning, and found that the sum of her life had, at very long last, come right. And that, she decided, was a punchline worth every farthing of the joke.